Dune, Frank Herbert. This is classic science fiction that feels wide as a continent, with politics, ecology, and long-term strategy shaping the atmosphere more than any single scene. When a book feels like an epic movie, it usually does three things well. It gives you a world that feels bigger than the page, it moves with clear cause and effect, and it creates images you can picture without effort. Dune is a reliable starting point because it is written to be read as a complete experience, even though it begins a larger universe. In this video, the phrase epic movie does not mean constant action. It means scope. It means decisions that matter, and settings that feel physically real. Dune delivers that through desert landscapes, competing factions, and a strong sense of history sitting behind every conversation. You do not need to memorize names or treat it like homework. Read with one simple focus: who wants power, what resource controls the future, and what rules keep the society stable. If you like big world films with politics and atmosphere, this book is the closest match on the list. If you prefer historical epics, jump to Shōgun. If you want fantasy spectacle, The Way of Kings is your lane. By the end, you should be able to choose one book based on reading experience, not on genre labels. A quick format note: many editions add introductions or appendices. You can skip any scholarly preface on a first read and start with the story itself. If you enjoy it, you can return later for the context. This keeps the reading experience cinematic and clean. Shōgun, James Clavell. This is historical fiction that reads like prestige television, with careful detail, a huge cast, and a strong sense of place that never lets the story feel abstract. Shōgun is the pick when you want the epic feeling to come from culture, strategy, and survival rather than magic or technology. It is long, but it rarely feels slow because scenes are built around negotiation, danger, and shifting alliances. If you want the cinematic experience of being dropped into another world and learning its rules through pressure, this is a great choice. The book's scale comes from how many layers of society you see, from everyday routines to high-level power games. That breadth is what makes it feel like a big-screen story. A beginner-friendly way to read Shōgun is to treat each chapter like an episode. Do not rush, let the setting do the work. If you enjoy the feeling of living inside a place, not just watching events, you will likely love it. If you are unsure about committing to a very long novel, keep this in mind. The prose is usually straightforward and scene-based. You are not decoding symbolism. You are following choices and consequences. That makes it easier than its page count suggests, especially in audiobook format. Interesting background can also reduce intimidation. The novel was written by James Clavell, who built it to feel like a full cultural immersion rather than a narrow war story. That design choice is why the book often feels like a long, expensive production. Treat the detail as atmosphere, not as trivia, you must remember. The Pillars of the Earth, Ken Follett. This is a historical novel that feels like a decades-long movie montage, following ordinary ambitions as they collide with power, faith, weather, and time. The epic scale here is not about armies. It is about a project so large that it reshapes the lives around it, and you get to feel the weight of years passing without losing readability. If you are cautious about long books, this is one of the safest big reads. The writing is clear, the scenes are concrete, and the stakes are easy to understand at a human level. That is why it often feels cinematic. You can picture locations, crowds, and turning points without needing a glossary. This book is also useful if you want an epic movie feeling that stays grounded. You get craft, labor, and social pressure, not just spectacle. It is the kind of story that makes time itself feel like part of the setting. If you finish it and want something with more overt strategy and big systems, move to Dune. If you want a classic adventure sweep, move to the Count of Monte Cristo. If you want a fantasy version of scale and set pieces, move to The Way of Kings. One reason this book stays readable is that Ken Follett writes with strong scene goals. You can usually answer three questions at any point: what someone wants, what blocks it, and what the next practical step is. That clarity is the same tool good films use to keep long runtimes engaging. The Count of Monte Cristo, Alexandre Dumas. This is a classic adventure with a clear forward drive, set across cities and years, with the satisfaction of a long plan unfolding through vivid scenes. Many people want an epic movie in book form, but fear classics because they expect slow prose or confusing structure. This is the opposite. It is long, but it is built from clean sequences that land like film set pieces. The easiest way to approach it is to choose a modern, readable translation and let the story carry you. You do not need literary analysis to enjoy it. The cinematic feeling comes from how often the book shifts settings and social environments while keeping the main thread easy to follow. This is also a great pick if you want scale without a high barrier. Compared with Dune, there is less invented terminology. Compared with Shōgun, the focus is more on a tight story engine than on extended cultural immersion. If you like classic films with momentum and big emotional payoff, start here. If you want modern fantasy spectacle instead, go to The Way of Kings. If you want historical realism and atmosphere, go to Shōgun. A small practical tip: if you are reading a classic for the first time, choose a version with modern punctuation and clear paragraphing. The Count of Monte Cristo exists in many editions, and readability varies. Picking a smooth edition can turn it from a project into a page-turner. The Way of Kings, Brandon Sanderson. This is modern epic fantasy with huge battles, deep world-building, and a scale designed for long-form immersion across multiple books. It is the only pick on this list where commitment is the main decision because it is the first major entry in a long, ongoing series. If you want the blockbuster feeling of a massive world, dramatic set pieces, and a sense that everything is part of a larger plan, this is your match. The writing is accessible for epic fantasy, but the scope is big, and the book rewards patience. A simple beginner rule is to aim for experience over comprehension. You do not need to understand every term immediately. Focus on tone, pacing, and whether you enjoy spending time in the world. If you are not ready for a long series, do not force it. Pick Dune for science fiction scale, or Shōgun for historical immersion, and come back when you want a multi-book journey. The best reading plan is the one you will actually continue. Brandon Sanderson is known for clear, modern prose, and for building large worlds with rules that stay consistent. That consistency is why the scale does not feel random. It can feel like watching a well-planned cinematic universe, where details pay off later without needing you to take notes. Dune, Frank Herbert. This is where you go if epic means systems. Empires, resources, belief, and strategy that plays out over long horizons. The cinematic feeling comes from how the book frames big decisions as scenes you can picture, not as abstract history. If you have bounced off dense science fiction before, reduce the pressure with a simple method. Read one chapter at a time and keep a short mental list of factions rather than names. The story becomes clearer when you track motivations. Dune also teaches a useful reading skill. It shows how a world can feel real because it has constraints. A desert changes everything. Scarcity changes politics. Institutions change how people speak and behave. Those constraints are what make the book feel like a lived-in place. The same way a good film uses setting as a character. If you want more spectacle after this, The Way of Kings expands the scale in a fantasy direction. If you want a classic adventure sweep instead, The Count of Monte Cristo is your next step. If you want to increase clarity, consider pausing after each section to restate the goal in your own words. This keeps you from getting lost in terminology. It is the same effect as a film cutting back to a clear objective after a complicated scene. Shōgun, James Clavell. This section is a commitment check, because epic can mean two different things. It can mean big spectacle, or it can mean long exposure to a world until it feels real. Shōgun is the second type, and that is why it feels like a long-form film or series rather than a quick thriller. Choose it when you want immersion and atmosphere. If you mainly want fast action every page, start with The Count of Monte Cristo instead. A practical test is your reading rhythm. If you can read for 20 to 30 minutes a day for a week, you will settle into this book. If you have been away from reading, you can also use the audiobook to keep momentum. The payoff is the feeling that you have actually visited a different world. That is the specific epic movie sensation Shōgun delivers, and it is hard to replicate with shorter novels. One more choice factor is mood. Shōgun can feel intense and serious, but it is not written to be bleak. It is written to make you respect a world that is not yours. If you want a calmer epic, The Pillars of the Earth is usually the softer landing. The Pillars of the Earth, Ken Follett. If you want epic scale without jargon, fantasy terms, or dense science fiction concepts, this is the safest start. The book's scale is built from ordinary pressures: money, status, weather, and the slow grind of work. That makes it easy to follow, even when the story spans years. The reason it feels cinematic is that it naturally creates visual scenes. A location, a goal, a setback, and a new attempt. You can picture crowds, buildings, and shifting fortunes without effort. This is also a good pick if you like stories where progress is earned. You see time and labor accumulate into something large. If that kind of grounded build appeals to you, this book can become a personal reference point for what epic really means. After you finish, you can choose your next epic based on what you want more of. For strategy and institutions, go to Dune. For classic adventure momentum, go to The Count of Monte Cristo. For immersive culture and politics, go to Shōgun. For fantasy spectacle, go to The Way of Kings. Another reason it works for students and busy readers is that it rewards short sessions. You can read a single scene and feel complete. That makes it easier to build consistency, which is the real secret of finishing any epic novel. The Count of Monte Cristo, Alexandre Dumas. This is the classic cinema lane. You choose it when you want a story that travels through social worlds, cities and time, but never becomes hard to track. It also proves a useful point. A book can be old and still feel modern if the storytelling engine is strong. A common mistake is choosing an edition that feels like homework. You want a readable translation and clean typography. If you do that, the pages move quickly because the book is built around consequences and turning points, not around philosophical wandering. Another mistake is expecting the book to behave like a modern thriller. The pleasure here is sustained build-up and payoff. Think of it as a long film that earns its final act by doing careful setup. If you like this style, Shōgun is a strong next pick for more historical immersion. If you want to switch genres but keep scale, Dune is the science fiction equivalent. If you want modern fantasy with bigger spectacle, The Way of Kings is the step up. If you want the most film-like pace, read in larger chunks when possible. This book benefits from momentum because setups and payoffs echo across many chapters. That said, it still works in small sessions because each scene usually ends on a clear shift in situation. The Way of Kings, Brandon Sanderson. This is the modern blockbuster lane, and it comes with one clear rule. Start only if you are open to a long series. If you want a complete one-book experience first, pick Dune or Shōgun and return later. If you do start here, reduce pressure at the beginning. Read the first 10 chapters and decide based on the experience, not on whether you understand every detail. The book is designed to reward patience. Early sections lay groundwork so later moments feel earned. This is also the best pick if you love the feeling of large maps, varied landscapes, and multiple story threads that eventually connect. That structure is what gives it a cinematic sensation, like watching different camera angles slowly reveal the full picture. If you finish and want a palate cleanser that still feels big, The Count of Monte Cristo gives you epic sweep in a single classic volume. If you want big world science fiction, Dune is the clean pivot. If the length worries you, pair it with a simple checkpoint plan. Aim for 50 pages, then reassess. If you feel curious and oriented, continue. If you feel lost, swap to The Pillars of the Earth for a clearer, more linear epic and come back later. Dune, Frank Herbert. Here is the simplest way to use this list. If you want science fiction epic scale, start with Dune. If you want historical immersion, start with Shōgun. If you want grounded long-term human drama, start with The Pillars of the Earth. If you want classic adventure momentum, start with The Count of Monte Cristo. If you want modern fantasy spectacle, and you are open to a series, start with The Way of Kings. You do not need to read them all. Pick one that matches your current energy and time. Then, if you want another epic movie feeling next, come back to this list and choose a different lane. In the long video on this channel, I also explain how to handle long books without losing momentum, and how to choose a format that fits you, including audiobook options. Final reminder. Epic reading is not a test, it is a mood choice. The long video connected to this short list gives you a simple method for choosing one book today and building a low-pressure plan to finish it. Save this list and reuse it whenever you want a big visual reading experience without spoilers or complicated continuity.